behind the emotional drama lies a chilling legal battlefield. Fraud, forged signatures, hidden assets, and a calculated insurance plot reveal a case far beyond infidelity. This is not just a divorce, it's a war for justice. Watch how one woman turns evidence into power and prepares to dismantle an empire built on lies.
7 months pregnant and barefoot in a Miami thunderstorm, Maya's silk nightgown was soaked through, outlining the swell of her belly. The biometric lock on her penthouse door chimed, sealing her out. Through the storm-streaked glass, she watched another woman straighten a photograph on the wall of her foyer. Her husband had just exiled her into the deluge for his protege. He assumed she'd retreat to her family, a quiet casualty of his ambition. He gambled on her being too devastated to fight back and too blinded by love to see his treachery. He was wrong because what Maya would uncover was a web of fraudulent permits, 5 years of deceit, and a family trust updated to ensure neither she nor her unborn son saw a dime. This is how a discarded wife, pregnant, and left in a hurricane, brought the real estate mogul who betrayed her to financial ruin. It's done. 2 words. That's all she got from the man she'd loved for 5 years. The man who had commissioned a private symphony for their wedding. The one who co-designed their nursery with a hand-painted mural of the coastline because she'd grown up by the sea. The man who had whispered plans for their son's future against her stomach every night for 7 months. 2 words that shattered the world Maya thought she had built with Leo. She stood stunned in the private elevator lobby of their home, the one she had helped design as a monument to their love. The home where she imagined their children taking their first steps on these polished marble floors, growing up surrounded by a life built on trust. Rain lashed the panoramic windows. The rumble of thunder felt like a premonition she had failed to hear. The humid wind whipped through the open terrace doors, chilling her bare skin. Leo stood there. Her husband? Her child's father. He was holding her design sketchbook, the one filled with concepts he'd always championed. He dropped it into the infinity pool on the balcony without a glance, ignoring their child, her bare feet, her shivering, and the fact that she was his wife. The sketchbook hit the water with a quiet splash. Ink bled across her life's work, blurring her name, Maya Reed, a name that suddenly felt foreign. Leo, her voice was a strangled breath. What's happening? I don't understand this. She reached for him, her hand trembling, grasping for the man she knew, the steady warmth of his presence. He flinched away as if she were poison, a thing to be discarded. I said it's done. His tone was flat and final, an investor cutting his losses. Are you confused or just overly sentimental? Sentimental? The word was a calculated strike, colder than any slap. He had never spoken to her with such clinical cruelty. Leo, if I did something wrong, just tell me. We'll get through it. That's what we promised. We're a team. The tears came then, hot on her cold cheeks, mingling with the rain. Leo offered a dry, dismissive chuckle. The sound she once cherished, now a sharp-edged tool. Get through it? You can't fix this, Maya. You pick out color palettes. You accessorize. I build empires. Your empire? The pain was now edged with disbelief. Leo, we built this together. No. He shook his head, a cruel smile touching his lips. I built it. You were just the perfect finishing touch. Just then, a figure emerged from their bedroom. Sienna, a rising star from his firm, walked out as if she belonged there. 26, with a severe black haircut, and wearing the diamond earrings Leo had given Maya for their anniversary. She looked like the new owner surveying her property, like Maya was a ghost already. It's over, Leo's voice was absolute. Sienna is here now. The security access is already revoked. You have 5 minutes to leave the building before security is called. The words were just noise. They didn't connect. Access revoked. Security. Each phrase was a separate, brutal impact. Sienna was replacing her, in her home, in her life, effective this instant. Not after a discussion, not tomorrow, now. As Maya trembled, her own home was becoming an impenetrable fortress. The doors would not open for her again, and Leo would have her removed like a trespasser, as if she hadn't selected every piece of furniture or spent weeks painting the nursery mural herself. "The baby!" she gasped, her hands instinctively cradling her belly. She felt their son kick, a sharp, urgent motion as if he knew his mother's terror. "Leo, I'm 7 months pregnant. This is a hurricane watch. I have nowhere to go." Sienna came to his side. She slid her arm around his waist with an effortless intimacy that made Maya's stomach clench. This was their routine. "That's no longer our problem," Sienna said, her voice like ice. "You should have been more valuable." Our. The one word confirmed everything. Not his problem, but theirs. Leo and Sienna? A partnership? And Maya was the liability they had just cut loose. "How long?" she whispered. "How long has this—" 3 years, Sienna answered, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. "Since the Ocean View deal closed, before the wedding. You were just the right kind of wife for his public image, the one to provide the legacy." 3 years. The betrayal was a chasm that stretched back through their entire marriage. His proposal on a yacht in Santorini, every promise, every shared secret, every single loving gesture, it was all a fabrication. "You're lying," Maya breathed, her mind rejecting the brutal truth. "That isn't true." "Leo, tell her she's lying." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were cold and empty, devoid of any feeling for her pain. How could she have been so blind? How had she shared a bed with this stranger? "Your brother lives in New York," Leo said tonelessly. "Call him or don't. It makes no difference to me. Just leave." He turned his back, his hand settling on the small of Sienna's back. They were a single, united front. "Please." The word was a raw, desperate plea. "Please, Leo," she choked on a sob. "Don't." The heavy glass door slid silently shut. The electronic lock engaged with a final click, and Maya was alone in the storm. Her sketchbook was sinking in the pool. The custom MR monogram on the cover now seemed like a pathetic joke. Her silk nightgown was a second skin, useless against the wind. Her feet were already numb on the slick marble. She stared at the windows of her own home, an entire wall of glass glowing with warmth and life, her designs, her future was in there. In the master suite, a shadow moved. Sienna, closing the automated blinds, wiping Maya from the skyline. Then the soft glow from the nursery vanished. Maya watched the window go dark, and a cold clarity washed over her. Sienna wasn't just taking her husband. She was taking her son's birthright. The nursery, with the coastal mural she'd poured her heart into, now belonged to another woman. The custom-built nursery furniture she'd designed, the antique silver rattle passed down through her family. It had all vanished, like a bad dream she couldn't wake from. Her entire world was on the other side of that dead-bolted door, her phone, her wallet, the keys to her Range Rover. She was trapped with nothing but the child kicking inside her and a bone-chilling Chicago wind whipping through her thin dress. A taxi's high beams swept over Eleanor for a second before moving on, indifferent. Just another pregnant woman standing on a Lincoln Park sidewalk after midnight. Not a soul stopped. She forced her legs to move. The concrete was icy and rough, littered with sharp pebbles that bit into the soles of her bare feet. A shard of a broken bottle glittered beneath a gas lamp, a silent warning. She pushed forward, one foot, then the next. Protect the baby. She ignored the sting in her feet. She ignored the brutal cold. She ignored the thought of Marcus, the man who had promised her a lifetime of safety before throwing her out with the evening trash. The grand greystones of the neighborhood stood silent, protected by ornate iron gates. Icy rain dripped from bare oak branches onto manicured gardens. The mansions were dark and still, their wealthy occupants dreaming in warm beds, completely unaware of the expectant mother navigating their perfect world. No one saw her, no one cared. A pharmacy sign glowed a few blocks away, its green cross a faint promise in the suffocating darkness. Eleanor fixed her eyes on it. One goal, get to the light. Everything else could wait. Her feet were bleeding. She felt the warm trickle mix with the cold rain. Small red marks on the wet pavement, evidence of her pain that the storm would wash away before morning. The automatic door of the pharmacy hissed open as she shuffled in. The sterile air was a shock. The scent of disinfectant and old magazines hung in the air. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. The man behind the counter looked up from a crossword puzzle. He was older, with a kind, tired face and a name tag that read George. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Dear Lord, child." The waitress came around the counter in a heartbeat, her voice laced with concern as she steadied Amelia's arm. "My God, what happened to you? Do you need a doctor? Are you all right?" Amelia's mouth opened, but no sounds emerged. A deep tremor seized her, her teeth chattering as the warmth of the diner let the full force of the shock set in. "Phone," she managed to say. "I need to call my father. Please, can I borrow your phone?" Without a second of hesitation, the waitress pulled her own mobile from an apron pocket and pressed it into Amelia's trembling hand. "Of course, sweetie. Take as long as you need." The waitress guided her into a worn vinyl booth by the window, a small haven in the midst of Amelia's personal hurricane. She returned a moment later with a faded fleece jacket from the staff room, draping it gently over Amelia's shoulders. "I've been there," the woman said quietly, her tone full of a wisdom earned from her own battles. "Not your exact spot. Not with a baby coming. But I know that feeling. I know what it's like when the person you trust with your life turns into a monster." Amelia met the eyes of this stranger, a woman working the graveyard shift who was showing her more humanity than the man she'd promised her life to, more kindness than the husband who had sworn to protect her. Her fingers trembled while she keyed in the number. One ring, then a second. "Pick up, please. Please don't let it go to voicemail." "Hello?" Her dad's voice was thick with sleep and confusion. "Who is this?" "Daddy?" The word was a shattered whisper, a name she hadn't used since she was a little girl afraid of the dark. "Daddy, it's me. I need you. You have to come and get me." There was a short pause. Then she could hear Robert Miller flinging his blankets aside, his bare feet hitting the floor, and the unmistakable sound of keys being scooped from a dish by the door. "Amelia, what's your location?" His voice was suddenly sharp, wide awake and primed for a crisis. "The 24-hour diner on Commonwealth, the one over by the bridge." The tears came again, an uncontrollable deluge matching the storm outside. "Please hurry. Please, Dad. I have no idea what to do. I'm on my way. Less than 10 minutes. Do not go outside. Stay right where you are. I'm almost there." The line went dead. Amelia sat huddled in the booth, a small puddle forming on the floor beneath her. It was stained slightly red from the rainwater and the blood from her torn feet. The baby shifted, a soft, determined nudge, a little reminder from within. "Mom, I'm right here. We're okay. We will be okay." "I know, sweetie," Amelia whispered, her hands cradling her belly, speaking to her son, the one constant who was all hers, who would never leave her. "I know. Mommy is going to handle this. I will keep you safe. I promise. No one will ever hurt you." The waitress, Brenda, set down a mug of weak, sugary tea. It was cheap and watery, but it was blissfully warm. "My name's Brenda," she said. "You don't have to tell me a thing, but I need you to hear me. Whatever he did to you, it wasn't your fault." "Do you hear what I'm saying? Guys like that, they know how to make you carry the blame. They can twist things so much you feel like you're the one who failed, but you're not. This is his failure, every bit of it." Amelia stared at this woman, Brenda, a name and a kindness she would carry with her forever. "Thank you." The words were inadequate, but they were all she had. "Thank you for helping me, for not making me explain." "Explanations are for later, when you're stronger," Brenda replied, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "For now, you just breathe. He's on his way." And he was. Just as he'd said. Not even 10 minutes later, Robert Miller's dark SUV pulled hard into the lot. He was out of the vehicle before it was fully in park. 62 years old, graying at the temples, a heavy coat thrown over his sleep clothes and boots on the wrong feet. He had obviously dressed in the dark and driven like a madman to reach her. He walked into that diner like a man who would tear down a wall with his bare hands if his daughter was on the other side. Amelia. He knelt beside the booth, his hands, strong and calloused, cupping her face. These were the hands that had built a restaurant group from a single kitchen, that had cradled her as a baby, that had only ever shown her gentleness. I'm here. Dad's here. Everything is going to be fine now. He looked up at Brenda, and a complete understanding passed between them. His silent, profound thanks, her nod of solidarity. Thank you, Robert said, his voice raw, for taking care of my daughter. You get that baby looked after, Brenda answered, handing him the fleece jacket. And for what that man did, you make him sorry he was ever born. Robert eased Amelia into his truck, leaving faint red footprints on the diner's checkered floor. Brenda was already reaching for a mop as they left. The SUV's cab was warm, with the heater blasting. A classic rock station played low on the radio. The familiar mix of strong coffee, faint spices, and her father's aftershave filled the air. It was the smell of being safe. Robert drove without speaking, his knuckles pale on the steering wheel, his fury a heavy presence in the truck. Amelia wanted to tell him the whole story, to let the awful truth spill out. But a fresh wave of grief stole her voice each time she tried. You don't need to talk, Robert finally said, his tone tight with restraint. Not until you feel ready. We're going straight to Mass General. Have them check you out, make sure the baby is okay. Nothing else matters right now. The hospital? The word cut through her haze. Why do we have to go to the hospital? Because your feet are bleeding. Because you were running in a freezing rainstorm. Because you are 8 months pregnant and have just suffered an unimaginable shock. Robert glanced over, his eyes a mixture of deep love and ice-cold rage. Because I am not taking any chances with you or with my grandson. His grandson. He had already laid claim to the baby, loving him and preparing to defend him. Amelia started crying again, but this time the tears were different. They were tears of gratitude and overwhelming relief. The sudden, certain knowledge that even after her husband had discarded her, she was not alone. She had her father. She had her son. She had herself. And that, she realized, would have to be enough. The hospital was a blur of harsh fluorescent lights, urgent voices, and constant motion. Amelia felt disconnected from her own body, like she was watching her life unfold from a distance. The red glow of the emergency room sign smeared across the wet windows. Nurses in scrubs moved with purpose. A child cried in a nearby room. A cardiac monitor beeped out a steady rhythm in another. Her world had fractured into a million pieces as she sat in a wheelchair trying to breathe. They had her in a flimsy blue hospital gown that was open in the back. Her feet, now cleaned and bandaged, sent a dull throb up her legs. The cuts were bad, but doctors assured her there was no permanent damage, just the result of running nearly half a mile down a dark side street after fleeing the gala. The baby's heartbeat filled the room, a rapid but strong 142 beats per minute, a tiny, defiant pulse against the chaos. Your blood pressure is elevated, said Dr. Evans, her voice professionally calm. But Amelia could see the fury behind the doctor's eyes, a mirror of her own unspoken rage. We need to get that down. This kind of stress isn't good for either of you. Amelia's hand went to her stomach. Is he going to be okay? The baby gave a hard, reassuring kick. Is my son going to be all right? His heart rate is high, but he's strong. He's a fighter just like you. Dr. Evans squeezed her hand, a small act of kindness that felt more potent than any drug. Babies are more resilient than we give them credit for. He'll be fine, and so will you. I will personally see to it. Her father, Robert, was a stone figure in the corner. He hadn't moved or spoken since they got there, his phone clutched in his hand. The door pushed open and Chloe rushed in. At 34, her red hair was pulled back messily, and she was still wearing the sweatpants and university sweatshirt she'd been sleeping in when he called. Her laptop bag was slung over her shoulder, and her journalist's gaze took in the entire scene at once. I came as soon as I heard. Chloe set her bag down and grabbed Amelia's other hand. Dad called me. Amy, I'm so incredibly sorry. How did you know? Amelia's voice was a raw whisper. It just hit the news feeds. Chloe's face hardened. Anyone in the Boston tech world knows by now. It's all over the place. What are you talking about? Chloe looked at Robert, and a shared, grim understanding passed between them. She held up her phone. A major tech blog ran an exclusive about an hour ago, right after everything went down. She tilted the screen. There was a picture of Liam and Olivia from the product launch party. They were standing by the fireplace Amelia had helped him design for the new office, his arm wrapped tightly around Olivia's waist. Katrina was pictured in a silver gown Clara knew was hers. Both were smiling. The article read, "A new skyline vision shaped by the power couple themselves. Some partnerships are destiny." It had hundreds of shares. The comments poured in. "So happy for you, Leo. It's about time. We all knew. She was never the right partner for your ambition. Cheers to a true union." Clara saw the names. Investors, architects, people she'd hosted, all celebrating her replacement, applauding as if she had never existed, as if 5 years of marriage could be erased by a magazine feature. "He made me a public fool," she whispered, her voice empty. "They'll all say I held him back." "Anyone who believes that is an idiot," Maya retorted, her loyalty sharp. "Clara, I need to ask you something, and you have to be honest. Don't cover for him." "What?" Maya moved closer, her tone serious. "How long has Katrina been his lead architect?" 5 years. He brought her on just after our engagement. Clara's brow furrowed. "Why do you ask?" "Because I started digging the moment your father called," Maya said, flipping open her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Property deeds, bank statements, and company emails flashed on the screen. "My firm gives me access and people owe me favors. Uncovering financial rot is what I do, Clara." "Maya, what is all this?" Maya paused her typing. She inhaled slowly, her eyes radiating a cold anger Clara had never witnessed. "This didn't start last month, Clara. It started before your wedding, a half year before he proposed." The world tilted. Clara steadied herself on the bed frame. "That's not possible. We were perfect then. He took me to Aspen for my birthday. These emails tell a different story." Maya angled the screen. "Leo and Katrina were sleeping together while you were planning your life with him, while you chose a venue and wrote your vows. They were laughing at you." She magnified one message. The text burned itself into Clara's mind. From Leo Sterling to Katrina Vance. Date, May 10th, 2019. 6 months pre-wedding. Subject, tonight is on. "I can't wait." Clara thinks I'm at a fundraiser. Her naivete is almost painful. "Don't worry about the wedding. It's a transaction. Her family's capital will launch the firm. After that, the world is ours. Just be patient a little longer. It's you. It has always been you. L." Clara stared at the words. Each one was a new cut, tearing down the reality she had built. A transaction. She was just the capital. "It gets worse," Maya said, her voice now quiet and precise. "Much worse." She navigated through financial records, wire instructions, and incorporation papers. "You remember the property portfolio your grandfather left you?" "Of course. $20 million of prime real estate. A gift from the man who built a Chicago dynasty. It was her future, her security. It was in a protected trust," Clara stated. "Leo couldn't touch it. He found a way around it." Maya showed her another file. 4 months after you were married, you gave him power of attorney. He said it was for the paperwork on the new downtown headquarters. The memory surfaced, sharp and nauseating. Leo's disarming smile and his casual words. "Just sign this, darling. It's all jargon. I'll handle it." She'd signed without a thought. He was her husband, the man she loved, who was carefully liquidating her entire inheritance. "How much?" Clara's voice was barely audible. "How much is gone?" 15 million. The number was a dead weight in the quiet room. "He funneled your grandfather's entire legacy into a shell corporation. That corporation then became the founding investor in Sterling Developments." He didn't build an empire, Clara breathed, the awful truth dawning on her. I did. My family's money built it. Every single brick was funded by you, Maya confirmed. You didn't marry a real estate mogul, Clara. You created him. Every award, every groundbreaking, every cent of profit, it all stemmed from the stolen $15 million. The baby kicked hard, a sudden urgent protest. There is one final thing, Maya said, her voice tight. I found it in the corporate insurance files. I almost didn't tell you tonight, but you need to know. Tell me, Clara ordered, her voice turning to steel. Tell me everything. Leo took out a key person insurance policy 3 months ago for $5 million. He is the only beneficiary. Clara's skin went cold. I never approved an insurance policy. Your signature is on the documents, a very convincing forgery. Maya looked her directly in the eye. Clara, he wasn't just stealing your money. He was planning for you to have a fatal accident. A fatal accident during a high-risk pregnancy. The heart monitor began to scream, its pulse chaotic. The baby twisted inside her. Dr. Evans appeared at the door, her expression grave. What is going on? Her blood pressure is spiking. We need a moment, Robert said, his voice a low command. Just give us 1 minute. The doctor hesitated, then agreed and stepped back. Clara looked from her father to Maya, then to the evidence on the screen. The car hadn't just stalled on that bridge. He was trying to kill her, hoping the cold, the stress, or the crash would finish the job. He wanted to collect a $5 million check while Katrina moved into her life. The man she had loved, the man she built a future for, was arranging her death while she was designing a nursery. I will ruin him. The thought was glacial. A voice she didn't recognize, born from the furnace of this betrayal. I will take everything from him. Every dollar, every share, every piece of the empire built with my family's fortune. He will be left with nothing. Good. Robert Davenport stood beside his daughter, his hand covering hers, with the steady strength of a man who built cities and destroyed rivals, because we are all going to help you, every last one of us. You're damn right. Maya snapped her laptop closed, her eyes bright with the fury of an accountant who had found the ultimate fraud. When we are finished with Leo Sterling, he will be begging on the street. I promise you that. Clara looked at them. Her father, her best friend, they had come without hesitation, bringing only fierce loyalty and a drive to see her win this war. She was not alone. She had never been. Leo had tried to isolate her, to convince her she was dependent on him. But she had her people, who loved her for herself, not her trust fund. Together, they would burn Leo Sterling's world to the ground. A fortnight had passed since that night. 14 days of strategy, of recovery, of watching her old existence burn, and choosing what to build from the ash. Clara had moved into her father's estate, into the bedroom of her youth, with its sweeping views of Lake Michigan, where she once drew and dreamed. Now it was a war room. The walls were plastered with charts, with shell companies outlined in red ink, and transfers traced in blue. It was a 7-year map of Leo's lies, every betrayal and stolen dollar accounted for. The nursery was 2 doors down, already finished by her father. He had painted the walls the pale blue of a morning sky, the color Clara had wanted for the home she'd just lost. He had assembled the crib, hung a small mobile, and placed a rocking chair near the window. Robert Davenport was not a man of many words, but the room was a testament to his love and his determination to give his grandchild the home she deserved. This morning, the war room was alive with quiet energy. Maya was at the main desk, surrounded by monitors. Eleanor Vance, their attorney, sat nearby, her notepad filled with meticulous notes. Robert stood guard by the door, and Clara sat in the middle of it all, 36 weeks pregnant, listening as Eleanor outlined their plan to destroy Leo. Tell me one more time, Eleanor said, from the very beginning. I need to understand the full scope of his fraud. Clara had told the story so often that the pain had numbed, leaving only cold resolve. The pattern of his control, the systematic theft, the slow erosion of her identity. I met Leo 7 years ago at a benefit for the Art Institute of Chicago. I was representing my mother's charity. He was there because that's where unattached heiresses gathered. She paused, letting the cold reality of his calculated hunt settle in the room. He was charismatic, brilliant, and wore a perfect suit. He said he was launching a boutique development firm with a revolutionary vision. He just needed the right backing to make it happen. And you had that backing? Eleanor's question was precise. I wasn't fully aware of my own resources then. I knew my grandfather left me a sizable trust, but the details were complex. He presented himself as self-made, as someone who would never need a woman's money. But he was bankrupt. Maya brought up a file. His net worth when you met was negative $42,000. Maxed out credit, defaulted loans. He was desperate, Clara. Trapped in a bespoke suit, a complete fabrication. He played me for a fool. Clara's voice was like steel, her hurt hardening into fury. He asked me to marry him a year after we met. The wedding was the following spring, a lavish affair at the Art Institute. My father footed the entire bill because Arthur claimed he was pouring every last dollar into our future. Our intel shows he was already seeing Isabel by then. Diana cut in. The texts began 6 months before you walked down the aisle. The power of attorney, her lawyer noted. Tell me exactly how he pulled that off. 3 months after the wedding, we were funding a major tech startup. The one I lost, Clara added, closing her eyes for a moment. I recall Arthur coming home with a stack of documents. He claimed the seed investment was a legal nightmare. He said he would manage it all if I just put my signature on a few pages. Did he walk you through the contracts? No. He waved it off as standard boilerplate. Nothing for me to trouble myself with. Clara met her lawyer's gaze. I managed my family's venture fund, Diana. I should have done my homework. I should have read every line. But I was in love with him, and I believed him. I was so swept up in the excitement, I never questioned him. He counted on that. Diana's tone was clinical, not judgmental. Men like Arthur are experts at finding a person's trust and using it as a weapon. Your love was his leverage. Your trust was his access. The document gave him everything. Chloe, the investigator, continued. Your inheritance, your private accounts, your grandmother's entire stock portfolio. Within 14 days of you signing, $9 million was wired to Vance Innovations. Vance. Clara scoffed. He named his fraudulent company after himself? It was a joke at my expense, a trophy. Sheer narcissism. Diana gave a thin smile. It's the mistake that always gets them caught. They can't resist signing their crime. What happened to the funds? Richard's voice was a low rumble, the first words he'd spoken. Chloe pulled up new files on the screen. Vance Innovations acquired a failing software company. He got it for next to nothing, overhauled the code, and flipped it 8 months later for a $3 million profit. So he profited, Richard clarified, using my daughter's inheritance. He made a fortune. For the next 6 years, he repeated that exact process. Each venture was financed with that initial $9 million. Every profit was rolled into a larger acquisition. By last year, Vance Innovations held assets in 12 different firms, with a total valuation of $87 million. $87 million, all built from Clara's legacy. A fund meant to guarantee her security, not to finance an empire for the man who planned to abandon her. That's not all, Chloe said gently. During those 7 years, Arthur was also bleeding your joint accounts dry. Small wire transfers initially, then bigger sums. Another $3 million was written off as loans to his firm that were never repaid. $12 million total. Clara did the mental arithmetic. He stole $12 million from me. That is the amount we can prove, Chloe said. It's likely there's more stashed in offshore holdings we haven't uncovered yet. Diana set down her pen, her gaze locked on Clara. In Illinois, joint assets in a divorce are split down the middle. Normally, Arthur would claim these were business investments, and you would receive much less. But these were not business investments, Clara stated, her voice unwavering. "They are stolen assets, my assets." "Exactly." Diana's smile was sharp, the kind that explained her reputation as a legal predator. "This is not a divorce proceeding. This is grand larceny. And the legal solution for larceny is not a 50-50 split, it is complete restitution." "Are you saying she recovers everything?" Richard asked, stepping closer. "Every single dollar?" "I am saying she has a legal claim to every cent, plus interest, compensation for her suffering, and punitive damages for the fraud he committed." Diana retrieved her notepad. Arthur Vance didn't just cheat. He committed a string of felonies: grand theft, forgery, and wire fraud. The life insurance policy. Clara's hand went to her belly, where the baby stirred. "The policy," Diana confirmed. "You never put your name on that paper. He forged it, which is a federal offense. And given that he abandoned you during a difficult pregnancy, we can make a compelling argument that he was deliberately creating a scenario that endangered your life." The room went quiet, the weight of the statement hanging in the air. "What is our plan?" Richard demanded. "What do we need to make him pay?" "We need all the transaction records, bank transfers, wiring instructions, company filings, which Chloe has already organized." Diana pointed to the laptop. "We will require expert witnesses, a handwriting analyst for the forgeries, and a forensic accountant to trace the money." "I can handle that," Chloe said. "I know people. We need an insider, someone from within Arthur's company who can corroborate the entire plan." "Who is aware of the fraud? Who can testify about his intentions?" "Leo Vance," Richard said the name. Every head turned toward him. "Arthur's CFO. He was there that night. He knows the whole story." "How are you certain?" Clara asked. "He called me yesterday. He said his guilt has been tormenting him for weeks. He wants to set things right." Richard's jaw tightened. "I told him to lay low, that we would reach out when we were ready." Diana scribbled a note. "We'll get in touch with him this afternoon. If he agrees to testify, our case is solid." Clara stood up, walked to the window, and stared out at the Chicago skyline where the Sears Tower met the overcast sky. She pictured her grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, a woman who had navigated the family through financial collapses, watched empires crumble, and promised her kin would never be so vulnerable. She had multiplied their wealth fourfold with smart tech deals and passed it to Clara with one simple directive: "Build something tangible, darling. Never allow a man to dictate your worth." Arthur had certainly tried to dictate hers. He had valued her at zero. A signature on a line, a funding source, a respectable wife. But Eleanor Sterling had recognized the strength in her granddaughter that Clara had nearly forgotten about. The tenacity, the sharpness, the drive to succeed. "I want it all," Clara said, her voice like a shard of glass. "Every patent, every line of code, every single share. I want his company. I want the condo. He can leave with the watch he's wearing and nothing else." "That is an ambitious goal," Diana noted. "Is it realistic?" Diana tapped her pen. "Given what we know, yes, but it will be an intense fight. Arthur has connections. He has a battalion of lawyers. He's considered a titan in the tech industry here. He used my connections. My lawyers are loyal to my family." "My name opened those doors for him," Clara retorted, turning from the window. "Everything he created with my family's capital. I am not demanding a single thing that isn't already mine. I am just taking it all back." "Then we prepare for battle," Diana said, rising to gather her documents. "We file the suits in 3 days. Divorce proceedings, a lawsuit for corporate fraud, and a tip to the SEC. We will attack him from every direction. By the time he realizes what is happening, his assets will be frozen. And Isabel," she continued, "will be named as a co-conspirator. She was an accessory to the fraud. She will suffer the consequences right alongside him." Clara nodded, a cold resolve washing over her, a clarity she hadn't felt since before the company went public, before Arthur, before she made herself smaller to fit into his world. She was finished being the dutiful wife, finished staying silent, finished being the woman Arthur thought he owned. She was Clara Sterling, granddaughter of Eleanor, daughter of Richard, and soon a mother to a child who would carry their legacy of strength, and she was preparing to reclaim every last dollar that belonged to her. Leo Vance arrived at Richard Sterling's Gold Coast residence at 3 p.m. He pulled up in a black Lucid, was dressed in a designer sweatshirt, and carried himself like a man used to boardroom negotiations and industry panels. But his hands shook when he pressed the doorbell, and when Clara met his eyes, she recognized the look. Guilt. The type that ruins every meal and makes sleep impossible. The type that makes every second feel like a countdown to a confession you know you can't avoid. They gathered in the study. Diana sat on one side of the large desk, her legal pad ready. Chloe was on her laptop, prepared to verify every claim. Richard stood near the fireplace, arms folded, observing with the quiet intensity of a man who had faced down countless betrayals. Leo sat on the very edge of a wingback chair, unable to relax, adjusting his sleeves, his gaze fixed on anything but Clara. "Thank you for seeing me." His voice was strained, weak. "I know I have no right to ask for your time." "You are correct," Clara said. "You don't. So explain why you are here." Leo swallowed hard, his Adam's apple moving. When he finally found his voice, the story came rushing out. "I was at the office the night he did it. Arthur asked me to stay late for a meeting. We were supposed to be reviewing the quarterly reports for the board. But that was a lie. We were in his office when I heard a phone call. It was your message, then his voice, and then a woman laughing with him. I went into the hallway and I saw him. He stopped, squeezing his eyes shut as if replaying the scene. I watched him move your inheritance into a new biotech venture, saw him revoke your access to the financials, and delete your name from the incorporation papers. I saw Sophia stroll into his office looking like she'd just cured cancer. And you said nothing. It wasn't a question." "I said nothing." Mark's voice was hollow. "I stood outside his door and watched him digitally erase you from the company your money built, and I did nothing. No warning, no anonymous tip. I just stood there while he betrayed his pregnant wife." "Why?" Ellie asked. "Why didn't you do something?" "I was a coward." Mark met her eyes, which were brimming with a pathetic shame. "I knew what Liam did to people who crossed him. I'd seen him ruin careers and sabotage rivals. I was part of it. The inflated trial data, the shell corporations, the offshore accounts. I knew where every skeleton was buried. I was terrified if I challenged him, he would bury me next." A tense silence settled in the room. Grace typed furiously. Ben made a fresh note, his face unreadable. He looked like a predator that had just caught the scent of blood. "You said you want to help." Ben's voice sliced through the quiet. "What does that help look like?" Mark reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim company tablet. His hand trembled as he set it on the mahogany desk. Everything, the fake clinical results he showed investors, the forged regulatory filings, the labyrinth of shell companies used to launder your family's seed money. I have secured copies of everything. "Why?" Grace asked, her tone sharp. "Why would you keep a record of your boss's felonies?" "Because my expiration date was coming," Mark said, a spark of resolve in his voice. "Liam uses people. He used his first partner, forcing him out for almost nothing right before their first big patent was approved. He did it to his lead researchers, stealing their work and threatening them with lawsuits. You saw all that, and yet you stayed." "I did. The money was life-changing. I was scared. It's shockingly easy to look the other way when you aren't the one getting destroyed." Mark looked directly at Ellie. "But then I saw the announcement about the baby, and it wasn't just about business anymore." Grace plugged the tablet into her laptop, her eyes widening as a file directory appeared. "This is a digital fortress," she breathed. "He has everything. Encrypted emails from the last 4 years, server access logs, wire transfer confirmations, the originals right beside the forgeries. It is all in there." "There's something else," Mark added, taking a printed document from his coat. "This is the revised investor agreement. Liam had me witness it. He claimed you signed it at home saying you were too tired to come into the city." "I never saw that paper in my life." Ellie's voice was ice. "I know. The signatures aren't even a close match. Liam got sloppy. Mark slid the document across the table. This is proof he forged your name to seize total control of your family's shares. This isn't just fraud, it shows a clear pattern of criminal intent. Ben took the document, his eyes scanning it quickly. A slow, predatory grin spread on his face. Mr. Peterson, you do grasp the immense value of what you've just provided us. I'm handing you Liam's entire criminal operation on a silver platter, Mark said, getting to his feet. And I'm offering my sworn testimony. Whatever you require, I'll provide. So why come forward now? Ben spoke, his voice a low rumble. You've held on to this for months. You could have stopped him at any time. Why today? Mark turned his back to them, facing the large window. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. I have a younger brother. He's 22. Just got accepted to Harvard Medical School. He's a good kid, full of integrity. Every time I looked at him, I wondered what I had become. I watched Liam steal a future from his own child and said nothing. If my brother ever discovered the kind of man I was, I'd never be able to look him in the eye again. So this is about clearing your conscience. Ellie's voice was flat. Not about justice. Perhaps. Does it matter why? Mark shrugged. The end result is the same. You get the evidence to destroy Liam. I get to feel like a person my brother wouldn't despise. Everyone wins, except for Liam. He's going to get exactly what he has coming. Mark picked up his coat. I will testify. I will tell the authorities everything. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. But I need one thing in exchange: immunity. Ben had anticipated this. Whatever fallout comes from this, you want to walk away clean. Yes, but I'm not looking for forgiveness. I know what I did, but I can't testify if I am sitting in a cell next to Liam. Ben glanced at Ellie, leaving the decision to her. She looked at Mark, a man she had known for years, who had attended their parties and praised her architectural designs, all while knowing her husband was embezzling her inheritance and sleeping with his head of R&D. He deserved nothing. He didn't deserve a second thought, but he was a weapon, and a weapon was what she needed most right now. Immunity, Ellie's voice was like stone, is conditional. It depends on your absolute and total cooperation. If you omit a single detail or lie to protect Liam in any way, the deal is off. Understood. Now leave. We'll be in touch. Mark nodded, walked to the door, then stopped. For what it is worth, I truly am sorry. I should have told you. I should have done anything but stand by and watch. He paused. I hope you take him for everything. I hope you make him pay for every single lie. And I hope his daughter knows that her mother was the toughest woman in Boston. He was gone. The door clicked shut. Grace looked up from her computer, her face glowing. We got him. We have everything we need. Between Mark's files and what we've already found, we can prove securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Liam isn't just going to lose his company. He's going to prison. Ben was already on the phone. I'm calling the Attorney General's office. This is no longer a civil matter. It is a criminal one. Ellie's father, Robert, came and sat beside her, putting an arm around her shoulders. How are you doing? Just a month ago, she had cried on her closet floor, believing she had lost everything. Her husband, their home, her future, her own judgment. Now she held the power to annihilate the man who had tried to erase her. Files, testimony, and evidence that would burn down the empire Liam had built with her family's money and her broken trust. It didn't feel like a win. Not yet. It felt like the opening salvo in a long and brutal war. A war she'd have to fight while 8 months pregnant, while grieving a marriage, while questioning everything she thought she knew. I feel broken, she confessed. And furious, and terrified, and just so sad. You're allowed to feel all of it, Robert said, squeezing her shoulder. Feel all of it, but don't you dare let it stop you. It won't. Ellie placed a hand over her belly. The baby answered with a sharp kick, a strong, determined kick, the kick of a fighter. Because this isn't about me anymore. It is about her, for the future she deserves, with the mother she deserves. She walked to a whiteboard where the timeline of Liam's deceit was drawn out like a map of her wasted years. 10 years, 3,652 days spent loving a lie, a man who had never loved her back, building a life on a foundation of sand. But she wasn't that person anymore, the woman who trusted blindly and signed documents without reading them. That woman was gone. The person who remained was harder, colder, and intensely focused. Liam had forged his own enemy, and now that enemy was coming for him. 3 o'clock in the morning. The house was still. The baby was quiet. Ellie sat in the dark at her father's kitchen table. A mug of tea sat cold and forgotten in front of her. The window reflected only the pitch-black sky and her own exhausted face. She hadn't had a full night's sleep in weeks. The baby was usually so active at this hour, a tiny acrobat doing flips and rolls. But tonight there was an unnerving stillness, just a profound quiet where her daughter was supposed to be. "Come on!" Ellie pressed a hand to her stomach, a shard of fear cutting through her exhaustion. "Please move. Kick for Mommy." The seconds stretched into an eternity. Silence. Then a flutter. A tiny elbow dragging against her skin, a slow turn that pressed into her ribs. "There you are," Ellie whispered, relief washing over her. "There you are, my sweet girl." Thank God. She picked up the mug and took a sip. It was cold and bitter, but it was something to hold on to. Sleep was a distant memory. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Liam's face. The disdain in his eyes, the curl of his lip, the way he looked at her like she was an inconvenience he needed to delete. 10 years. A decade of her life, her entire inheritance, the unwavering belief they were a team, it was all gone. She'd thought they were building a marriage, a future. But it had all been a performance. Every single moment. From their first meeting at that Boston charity gala, it had been a calculated fraud, and she was the mark. She unlocked her laptop and navigated to the bank's website. Sophie told her not to look, that it was just a form of self-harm. But she had to see it again. A charge from a bespoke jeweler appeared. A transaction that started the unraveling. From there, she had found his private Instagram. It wasn't just any jeweler, but the one they'd used for her engagement ring, the place on Newberry Street where Leo swore they'd build their family legacy. Now a photo showed him on a yacht with Amelia. The necklace he'd bought with Maya's money was around her neck. They were docked at their private marina slip, the one he said was an investment for their future family. The post's caption was a knife to the gut. Asterisk building a real future with my true north. Some chapters have to end for the best ones to begin. 347 likes. The comments were a fresh wave of nausea. Asterisk, so happy for you both. Asterisk, finally. We knew this was the real deal. Asterisk, she was always holding you back. Asterisk, cheers to your freedom. Maya scrolled through the names. Women who had praised her home design, drank her Chardonnay, and smiled while she talked about how lucky she was. They were all cheering for her replacement, acting as if a decade-long marriage could be erased by a single social media post. Her pain was invisible, her entire existence negated. The term surfaced in her mind. Asterisk. He was manipulating me. For 10 years, every doubt, every question was dismissed as her being irrational or overly sensitive. The memories were suddenly sharp, the late-night investor calls that stretched until dawn, the unexplained charges on the account he called business development, the times he smelled faintly of a different woman's perfume. He'd just laugh, telling her she had a wild imagination, his calm expression making her question her own sanity. Asterisk, I knew it, Maya whispered, her hand on her swollen belly. She spoke to her unborn daughter and to herself. Asterisk, I always knew something was wrong, but I let him talk me out of it. I trusted him more than my own instincts. That was the cruelest cut. Not just the affair or the theft. The deepest wound was knowing she had enabled her own destruction. She had chosen his reality over her own, making herself smaller to fit into the life he constructed, a life that was a lie. The baby kicked. a sharp reminder against her ribs. Asterisk. I know, sweetheart. Mommy made a huge mistake. Maya brushed away tears she hadn't realized were falling. Asterisk, but I'm done making them. From now on, I trust my gut. No one will ever make me doubt my own mind again. She heard a soft noise. Her father stood in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep. In the dim morning light, the lines around his eyes seemed deeper. Maya? He didn't turn on the light, respecting the darkness she was sitting in. He just walked over and sat beside her. How long have you been awake? Hours. My brain won't shut off. I know the feeling. He took her hand, his own calloused from years of drafting architectural plans. It felt solid and real. Tell me what's on your mind. I just keep wondering what I did to deserve this. You did nothing to deserve this, then why does it feel like I did? The question lingered in the air, a raw confession of her deepest fear, because that is exactly how he designed it. Arthur's voice was uncharacteristically hard. Men like Leo don't just take your money, they take your reality. They twist things so completely that you stop trusting your own perceptions. You start to believe that every single problem is your own fault. How do you know that? Because I watched your mother go through the exact same thing. Arthur's eyes looked past her, into a memory. Her first husband, the one she refuses to name. He was just like Leo, charming, brilliant, and made her feel like the only woman on earth. Then he spent the next 3 years dismantling her, convincing her she was unstable, that her feelings were invalid, that she was crazy for expecting basic decency. Maya stared at her father. He had never once mentioned her mother had a life before him. How did she get out? She almost didn't. He had her convinced she was nothing without him, that no one else would ever love her. Arthur's hand tightened on hers. But then she learned you were coming, and that changed everything. She knew she couldn't raise a daughter to watch her own mother fade away. She left for you. She left for the woman she used to be and for the daughter she wanted to raise. Arthur squeezed her hand. And that is precisely what you're doing now. You are fighting for your daughter. You are building her future and becoming the mother she needs. Maya looked down at her belly, where the child who had become her reason to fight was resting. I feel so lost, Dad. I spent 7 years as Leo's wife, planning his networking events, being his sounding board, chipping away at myself to become the woman he wanted. She shook her head. I don't know who I am anymore. I have no idea who Maya Vance is supposed to be. You're about to find her. Arthur's tone was full of conviction. Not tomorrow and maybe not for a long time, but you will. And one day you'll realize him leaving was the best thing that ever happened to you. The woman you become will be stronger and smarter than the person he tried to erase. How can you be so certain? Because I've known you for 32 years. I know what you're made of. You are your mother's daughter. He stood and gently kissed her forehead. Now try to get some sleep. You'll need to be sharp tomorrow. I can't. When I close my eyes, I see his face. I know, but you have to try. For your little girl. She needs her mom at full strength. Maya let him guide her from the chair and up the stairs to her childhood bedroom. He tucked her in as if she were a little girl again. The monsters were different this time, dressed in bespoke suits with devastating smiles. Their empires were built on foundations of deceit. But her father was real, and Tessa and Grace were real. She wasn't alone, even though Leo had tried to make her believe he was all she had. That was another lie. She had her people, and with them, she wouldn't just survive this, she would win. The conference room at Grace Chen's law firm was buzzing with focused energy. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the determined faces of Maya's team. She sat at the head of the long table, 37 weeks pregnant. Her daughter kicked, as if eager for the confrontation. This was her council of war. Grace sat to her right, her eyes scanning legal documents with the intensity of a general planning a campaign. To her left, her sister Tessa was surrounded by tablets displaying streams of financial data. Across the table, Liam Shaw, a former colleague of Leo's, shifted in his seat, unable to meet her gaze. Her father, Arthur Vance, stood by the window, a quiet, unshakable presence. And there was a new addition. A woman named Jessica Reed sat next to Liam. She was 29, dressed in a simple, professional blouse, her hands clutching a cold cup of coffee. She was Leo's executive assistant before he fired her for being too observant, threatening her career if she ever revealed what she knew. He'd replaced her with someone more interested in perks than in protocols. "All right, everyone, thank you for coming," Grace said, her voice cutting through the quiet hum. "We file our injunction in 48 hours. I want a final pass on our strategy." "The financials are solid," Tessa interjected, pointing to one of her screens. "I've documented $20 million diverted from Maya's trust into a Cayman Islands account just 90 days after he got her to sign the digital asset management forms. I can trace every dollar through shell companies and inflated real estate purchases. I can prove Marcus Thorne's entire $90 million real estate empire was built with her family's trust." "And the forged deed transfers?" Clara asked. "I have 2 forensic document examiners ready to testify. They analyzed the metadata on 12 key files, including the new mortgage application. Their conclusion is unequivocal. Those are not Eleanor's digital signatures. They're clever forgeries cloned from a valid document, but fakes nonetheless." Clara nodded, making a note. "David, are you prepared to speak about the financial irregularities at Thorne Properties?" "Yes." David's voice, though laced with anxiety, was firm. "I can confirm Marcus knew those signatures were fraudulent. I was in meetings where he outlined the plan to bypass standard escrow procedures. I have server logs showing he instructed me to alter property valuations and inflate occupancy rates. I handled the final wire transfer myself." Marcus claimed Eleanor had approved it from their vacation home. He was so casual about it. David shook his head. "I should have questioned it." "The request was unorthodox, but I was too afraid of him to object. Your testimony establishes his motive." Clara then looked at Isabel. "Which brings us to you. I understand you have something that will cement our case." Isabel drew a deep breath. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. "I was Marcus's assistant for 3 years, long before Chloe came along. I saw everything. I saw him launch Thorne Properties with next to nothing. I saw him charm investors, threaten contractors, and cook the books as if it were a game. Why didn't I say anything? I was young. I was scared." Marcus made sure everyone knew what happened to people who crossed him. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "But mostly, I didn't have concrete evidence. I knew things were wrong. I heard the rumors, but I couldn't prove it. So what changed? I got careful." Leo pushed a small, encrypted hard drive across the polished table. "After my first 6 months, I started backing things up. Emails sent to a ghost account, audio memos of his calls, screenshots of financial records before they were sanitized. I always knew that someday, someone would have the courage to challenge Marcus. I wanted to be ready." She slid the drive toward Clara. "It's all on there. 4 years of evidence, including one specific call you all need to hear." Clara plugged the drive into her laptop, located the file, and pressed play. Marcus's voice, confident and slick, filled the conference room. The voice of a man who believed he was untouchable. "Isabel, I need the Q4 numbers revised for the investors. The real rental income is flat, but I need them to see a 30% jump." You can hear Isabel's recorded voice, younger, more hesitant. "But Mr. Thorne, that's fraudulent. That's ambition. It's how the world works." "Don't worry about the details. Just get the presentation ready for my meeting tomorrow." There was a short pause, then an addition. "And don't bother walking my wife through this. She's an architect. She doesn't have the mind for high finance. She probably thinks our portfolio grows on good intentions." The recording stopped. "There are dozens more just like it," Isabel said, her voice tight. "Discussions about shell corporations, directives to falsify inspection reports, and strategies to conceal debt from investors, from the banks, from Eleanor." He talked about her like she was a naive child, someone to be managed and shielded from reality. too delicate to understand his actual business. Eleanor felt his every word as a fresh betrayal. It confirmed her worst suspicion. Marcus never viewed her as a partner. She was just his initial investment and a respectable public image. But there's one more file. Isabel's voice dropped. It's from 2 weeks ago, the night before Marcus told Eleanor he was leaving her. She clicked another file. Marcus's voice filled the room again, this time joined by Chloe's. This pregnancy is becoming a serious cash flow problem, Chloe said, her tone sharp with annoyance. She's always tired, and all this spending on the nursery is tying up our capital. It's being managed. Marcus's voice was cool, clinical, as if discussing a poorly performing asset. These high-pressure situations can be delicate, and if something were to go wrong, well, that's what the estate's life insurance policy is for? You actually think she'd have a complication? I think finding out her husband has mortgaged her entire inheritance is a profound shock to the system. Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. Can you imagine? The stress alone could be enough. All that anxiety, the company on the brink of exposure, the public humiliation? A body can only take so much. If not, there are other ways. The timing is everything. The policy is airtight. The divorce papers are ready. Once she's out of the picture, we can finally liquidate. The audio clicked off. The office was dead silent. Eleanor sat frozen, her hands protectively wrapped around her belly, feeling the strong, steady kicks of her son. They were planning my death. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion, like she was describing a scene from a movie. They were plotting to make it look like a tragic accident, to cash in on the insurance, to build their future after I was gone. This is undeniable evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud and endangerment. Clara's voice was like shattering ice. Marcus Thorne is no longer just facing a civil suit. He is facing a battery of felony charges. And the state attorney general is going to be fascinated by his accounting methods and the origin of his startup capital. When do we act? Leo's voice was tense, the question of a brother who had seen his sister suffer enough. Tomorrow, Clara said, neatly stacking her documents. I've already prepared a brief for the Attorney General's office and the FBI's white-collar crime task force. They are awaiting our go-ahead. We will file the civil suit and criminal referrals simultaneously. By midday tomorrow, every asset tied to Marcus Thorne will be frozen solid. And Chloe, who is named as a co-conspirator, she is subject to the same criminal and civil penalties. That recording makes it impossible for her to claim she was unaware of Marcus's criminal intent. Eleanor looked at the team she had assembled, the mountain of digital proof, the legal storm they were about to unleash. 2 weeks ago, she had been cast out of her home, her bank accounts drained, convinced she was penniless. Now she held the power to destroy the man who had tried to erase her. But she didn't feel victorious. Not yet. Victory would be seeing Marcus's expression when he learned that his pregnant wife, the one he dismissed as a naive dreamer, had engineered his complete and utter ruin. She turned to her small group. Thank you for all of this. I know it wasn't easy. Some of you risked your careers. Others had to face old betrayals. Some of you have carried this weight for years. Her eyes met David's, their former head of finance. But you showed up for me. When I had nothing left, you were here, and I will never, ever forget that. David gave a solemn nod. You're doing what I was too cowardly to do. Take him down, Eleanor. Make him pay for it. Prove to everyone he ever wronged that justice is possible. It's not just possible. Eleanor rose, a hand resting on her stomach, her son stirring as if sensing his mother's iron will. It's inevitable. Because men like Marcus think the rules don't apply to them. They believe their charm and their connections make them invincible, but they always make one fatal mistake. They eventually cross someone who refuses to be broken, someone willing to burn their entire empire to the ground to get justice. She looked at Clara. File the paperwork, freeze his accounts, notify the authorities. Her voice was cold steel, forged in the fires of betrayal. It's time to take back everything he stole from my family. The story appeared on the Crane's Chicago business website at 9 a.m. on Thursday. By 10, it was the top story on every major news outlet. Real estate mogul accused of monumental fraud, heiress alleges husband stole trust fund to build empire, pregnant wife sues for control of company, Thorn Properties assets seized in federal probe. Eleanor watched the news unfold from her brother's Gold Coast apartment, 38 weeks pregnant, feeling the first faint twinges of labor. The timing was terrible. Or perhaps it was perfect. Her son would be born into a world where his mother had already fought and won his first war. The news anchor spoke with barely disguised excitement. It was a scandal built for the modern era. The brilliant wife, the predatory husband, the stolen fortune, and the epic corporate takedown. But the news report laid out a brutal story. $12 million embezzled from a family trust, 20 counts of forgery on appraisal documents, fraudulent property valuations, insurance fraud, and a voice memo hinting at a plot to trigger a medical emergency. Liam's face was on screen, a photo from a recent awards gala, looking polished and invincible. The reporter gave the summary. Liam Sterling, the golden boy of Chicago real estate, is facing multiple federal charges. His property empire was allegedly founded on capital stolen from his wife. The 38-year-old developer is accused of laundering $12 million through shell corporations to launch Sterling Properties, now worth over $90 million. Isabella's phone buzzed. Liam. She let it vibrate. 1 ring, 2, 3. She finally picked up. You have no idea what you've set in motion. He was aiming for threatening, but she could hear the fear beneath it, the desperate scramble for the power he'd held for 38 years. Izzy, we need to talk. This is all a huge miscommunication. No, Liam, it's not. These accusations are insane. You're being emotional. Your pregnancy is clouding your judgment. If you just come over, I have the actual trust ledgers. Isabella's words cut through his patronizing tone like glass. The original ledgers from my father's safety deposit box, the ones detailing the wire transfers from my trust, the downtown properties you bought with my inheritance, every inflated report you showed your partners. Silence answered. His breathing was tight. I have Mr. Dubois' complete sworn statement. He's already met with federal agents. He is ready to testify about the forged appraisals, the fake signatures, the private meetings where you explained how to hide the money. Dubois is a bitter old man. I have your burner phone, Liam, Isabella said, her voice flat. 2 years of voice memos, including the one from last week, where you and Amelia discussed how a medical crisis would be a very lucrative, unfortunate complication. If the shock of the company's failure caused a problem with the pregnancy, the dead air on the line was his admission. She could feel his mind racing, looking for an exit that wasn't there. What do you want from me? His voice was small, all the arrogance gone, replaced by pure, cornered terror. I told your partners, I told my lawyers, I want it all back. Isabella stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. The firm, the property deeds, the stock options, this lakeside penthouse, everything you built on my family's foundation. Which, Liam, is everything. That's insane. You can't actually think I will just hand over. I also need a full public apology and admission of guilt written by my legal counsel. You will admit to wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. You will state publicly that Sterling Properties was built with stolen money. You will apologize to me and to my father's memory. I will ruin you in court. Liam's voice found a trace of its old poison. I'll keep this in appeals for a decade. I'll drain you of every cent with legal fees. You and that baby will be left with nothing. Then the FBI gets the original ledgers. Isabella's tone was placid. This is a federal investigation now, Liam. You won't be battling me in a divorce court. You'll be battling the United States government for the next 20 years to avoid prison. She let that sink in, and I will send the voice memo to every newspaper and podcast in the country, the one about my unfortunate complication. By tomorrow, you won't be a failed developer. You'll be a sociopath. The man who schemed against his pregnant wife for an insurance payout, you wouldn't do that. A long, strained silence. She heard him take a shaky breath. He was caught, and he knew it. Izzy. His voice changed, trying to find that old, easy charm. Honey, please, let's just be smart about this. We can agree on a number. We can work something out. I'll sign over the penthouse, a controlling share in the company, a massive settlement. Just make this stop. I don't want to share. Isabella's voice was as cold as the winter lake. I don't want a settlement. I don't want a deal. I want it all. And I want you to wake up every morning for the rest of your life knowing you handed me the key yourself. She ended the conversation. Her hands were perfectly still, her heartbeat was steady. A quiet sense of clarity washed over her, something she hadn't felt in years. This was the woman she used to be, the art historian who graduated top of her class from Yale, the woman who could spot a fake a mile away, the woman Liam had spent 5 years trying to bury under his ambition. That woman was back, and she was just getting started. The arbitration was scheduled 3 days later. Isabella should have been at home. She was 37 weeks pregnant. Her doctor advised against any stress, but this was non-negotiable. She sat at the head of the conference table, her lawyer Grace beside her, her father standing behind them with a case of documents. Liam was at the far end, flanked by a trio of lawyers in suits that probably cost more than her first car. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. The rising star of Chicago's skyline looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Amelia was not there. She had retained her own counsel, cutting her own immunity deal. The first one off the ship. Grace opened the proceedings, her voice calm but firm. Mr. Sterling, can you explain these wire transfers from your wife's family art trust to a shell corporation registered in your name? Liam's lead attorney stood up. On this matter, my client invokes his Fifth Amendment right. Can you explain the $12 million moved from that trust to fund Sterling Properties? The Fifth Amendment. Can you explain the 20 falsified art appraisals filed with your investors? The Fifth Amendment. Can you explain the life insurance policy on my client where her signature was digitally forged? Liam's face went from pale to gray. His lawyers began whispering frantically, but that they were out of options. Grace pressed on. Can you explain these voice memos between you and Amelia Vance, where you refer to your wife's pregnancy as a financial complication? Where you discuss how a high-stress incident could be advantageous? Where you mention a $2 million insurance payout? Fifth Amendment. But the words came out as a strangled rasp, and for the first time since she laid eyes on him, Liam Sterling looked genuinely afraid. Later, Isabella rode the elevator down with Grace. Her body ached, and the baby was performing a series of energetic kicks against her ribs. Despite it all, she felt alive, powerful, and in control of her own destiny for the first time in 5 years. So how was that for you? Grace asked quietly. Isabella watched the floor numbers descend. He thought he married a pretty accessory, someone agreeable who would never look at the books or ask difficult questions. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. He was very wrong. He was catastrophically wrong. Grace permitted herself a small, sharp smile. You always had claws, Isabella. He just talked you out of using them. The ground floor was a frenzy of reporters. Camera flashes blinded her, microphones were pointed at her, questions were yelled from every direction. Isabella walked through the storm without saying anything. Her head was held high, one hand protectively on her belly. The questions followed her. Mrs. Sterling, is it true you're dissolving Sterling Properties? Miss Reyes, will your husband be indicted? Isabella, do you have any regrets about your marriage? She never looked back, simply got into the waiting town car as her father held the door and let him drive her home. Alone in her old bedroom that evening, surrounded by files and legal notes, Isabella felt the first tightening low in her back. A Braxton Hicks, she assumed. Nothing to worry about. Then another, much sharper. Then her water broke. Dad, she yelled, grabbing the edge of the desk, breathing through the wave of pressure. Dad, it's time. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The contractions were getting closer, the pain was growing. Her father's calm voice was her anchor. Her lawyer was on the phone, alerting Isabella's medical staff. In the delivery room, surrounded by bright lights and focused faces, Isabella had one single thought: her daughter. One final push, the doctor encouraged. Dr. Anya Sharma's voice cut through the haze. "You're almost there, Isabella. You can do this." She thought of blueprints spread on a table, of cold glass towers and condescending remarks. She thought of the woman she'd allowed herself to become and the woman she was now. She pushed, and her daughter was born with a loud, healthy scream. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, perfect, with a shock of black hair and eyes that would one day be the same deep espresso as her mother's and her grandmother's. "Hello, my beautiful girl," Isabella whispered, bringing the baby to her chest, tears of sheer joy and exhaustion streaming down her face. "Hello, Sophia." Named for her grandmother, a woman who had built an art gallery from scratch and left a legacy of courage. Sophia Reyes, a name that meant strength, a name that would never carry the weight of sterling. "She's perfect," her father said from her side, his face wet with tears he didn't bother to hide. "She looks just like her mother." Isabella met her dad's gaze. This man had called in every favor for her. He had prepared her old room and never once doubted her plan. "Thank you, Dad." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything. "For all this. For believing in me. I always have, Izzy. From the day you were born." He leaned over and kissed her forehead. "And I always will." Sophia made a small sound, her tiny hand gripping the fabric of Isabella's hospital gown. "I made you a promise," Isabella whispered to her daughter. "The day I found out what he did, I promised I would build you a safe life, a life where no one would ever try to make you feel small." The infant slept peacefully, completely safe. "A promise I would die to keep. No matter what, you will always know your worth, your strength, and that you are more than enough." Through the windows of the Boston birthing suite, dawn broke. A new day, a new chapter. And Ava was more than ready. 3 weeks after Lily's birth, Ava watched Ethan Blackwood sign his life away in a sterile conference room. She shouldn't have been there, still healing. But some things must be witnessed. Some downfalls require an audience. Lily slept in her carrier beside her, lost in newborn dreams. The legal documents covered the polished mahogany, stock transfers, asset liquidations, deeds. Each signature from Ethan dismantled the private equity empire he'd built with her family's legacy and his own web of lies. His hand trembled signing the first document, giving Ava full control of Blackwood Capital. Miss Chen, her lawyer, read aloud, her voice cool and precise. "All holdings are transferred immediately. Mr. Blackwood will retain zero ownership, authority, or future claims." Ethan's pen scratched the paper. "All funds misappropriated from family trusts will be repaid from personal accounts, plus interest." He signed again. "A public statement penned by my client, admitting to gross financial misconduct, will be issued in 48 hours. Another signature. He looked hollowed out, his eyes dead. The wunderkind of Boston finance looked 20 years older. Zero contact with Ava Sterling or her daughter, Lily Sterling. Any violation of this will trigger the immediate reinstatement of federal fraud charges." Ethan hesitated. His attorney whispered to him. He signed. Miss Chen gathered the stack. "There is one final thing." Ava's voice cut through the silence. "The brownstone. My family home, I want it back." Ethan's lawyer started to object. "Miss Sterling, that was not part of the negotiated settlement." "It's in the addendum," Miss Chen said, sliding a final sheet of paper forward. "The residence was acquired using funds from Miss Sterling's inheritance. The deed was procured under fraudulent pretenses. Per state law, the transaction is null. The property reverts to my client." Ethan looked from the document to Ava. "You're taking everything." "I'm reclaiming what was stolen," Ava said, her voice quiet but ironclad. "Every dollar of that firm came from my grandfather's principles. My inheritance was the seed. I'm not taking what you built, I'm calling in the debt. Ethan signed the last page. One more thing. Ava's voice stopped him. Sophia, I want her out of the Seaport condo by morning. She can have the coat. Everything else is mine. A flicker of something crossed Ethan's face. Not remorse, but maybe recognition, as if seeing her for the first time. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for, he mumbled. Yes, and you were always as ruthless as I secretly feared. Ava picked up Lily's carrier, stood, and looked down at the man she once loved. Goodbye, Ethan. I hope prison gives you plenty of time to reflect, she said, and walked away for the last time. Sophia's trial for conspiracy to commit fraud began 6 weeks later. The prosecution laid out a damning case with evidence from Ava's forensic accountants, testimony from the firm's former CFO, David, and a mountain of financial records. Ava was present every day. Her daughter, Lily, was nestled in a sling against her chest, a silent spectator. The courtroom was filled with financial reporters and ruined investors, all eager for justice. Sophia looked fragile without her designer power suits. She seemed smaller, just a woman destroyed by greed. Her legal team claimed she was manipulated by a powerful CEO, but it was a weak defense. The prosecution showed Sophia's own emails, cold and calculating, where she referred to Ava's pregnancy as an inconvenience and joked about hiding assets. On the final day, Sophia's eyes met Ava's. Ava steeled herself for a look of hate, but instead saw pure, terrified panic. It was the face of someone who finally knew the game was up. Will the defendant please rise? The jury foreman said. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of wire fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On all remaining counts, we find the defendant guilty. Sophia just crumpled. Her lawyers caught her as she fell. A woman in the gallery began to weep. The sentence came a month later. 6 years in federal prison, minimum of 4. Ava didn't attend. She was home with Lily, building a tower with colorful blocks. Ethan's trial was a much bigger circus. Federal investigators had uncovered a rot that went far deeper than Ava's team had found. A decade of deceit that defrauded hundreds of investors out of millions. For 3 weeks, the prosecution presented a parade of witnesses and evidence. Ethan's lawyers tried to paint him as a visionary who simply overreached. The jury didn't believe it, guilty on all 32 counts. At his sentencing, the judge was blunt. He had reviewed all the evidence, including a photo of Ava, 8 months pregnant, discovering the locks changed on her own Beacon Hill home. Mr. Blackwood, you have demonstrated a pattern of behavior that is both criminally and morally reprehensible. The judge's voice was like ice. You stole from your own wife. You conspired with your mistress. You defrauded your clients. You referred to your unborn child as a financial liability. The judge let the words hang in the air. This court sentences you to 10 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole in 7. Ethan's legal team immediately began talking about an appeal. It was just noise. Ava got the news from her lawyer, Miss Chen. She was in her new house watching Lily take her first wobbly steps. 10 years. Miss Chen's voice was full of satisfaction. He'll be nearly 50 when he gets out. Ava watched her daughter stumble, fall, and push herself right back up. How do you feel? Miss Chen asked. Ava had to truly consider it. She thought she would feel triumphant, a sense of victory over the man who tried to shatter her. But that wasn't the feeling. What washed over her was relief, a deep and total release. A burden she didn't know she was still carrying had simply lifted. Then came an overwhelming peace. And finally, something she hadn't anticipated. Freedom. Not just from him, but from the woman she had been. Free from her self-doubt and from needing his approval. I feel like it's really over, she said, and like everything is just starting. Lily fell again and looked up at her mother. Ava simply smiled and opened her arms. Come on, my love. Try again. I'm right here. Lily stood, took 3 shaky steps, and fell into her mother's embrace. Good girl, you did it. Outside her window, the magnolia trees along the Charles River were in full bloom. Life was moving on. For Ava, for Lily, for the future they would build together. A year had passed since that day. Ava stood in the lobby of what was once Blackwood Capital. The cold, imposing sign had been gone for months. It now read Heritage Point Ventures. Her firm, her values, her belief in building things that mattered. The lobby was transformed. The stark chrome and black marble were gone, replaced by warm cherry wood and living plant walls. The art depicted not corporate conquests, but community projects and sustainable startups. Lily, now 16 months old, held tight to Ava's finger as she toddled. Miss Sterling, Miss Chen approached with a tablet. First quarter results are in. We're in the black. It's not leveraged buyout money, but it's clean. Ava smiled. I'll take clean over criminal every time. So will our partners, Miss Chen gestured around. David was just saying yesterday this is the first firm he's ever been proud of. David himself emerged from his office. He had stayed on, accepting a partnership. His office was now right next to Ava's. The Cambridge Community Housing Project is fully funded, David said, handing her a portfolio, and we break ground on the Roxbury Incubator Project next month. Ava lifted an eyebrow. Which location? David grinned. The one Ethan was going to use for that monstrous glass tower. The one he bribed city officials for. I thought it had a nice sense of poetic justice. Ava opened the portfolio. It showed a vibrant, mixed-use community. There were no extravagant condos. Instead, there were affordable apartments, a business incubator for local entrepreneurs, and a community health center, homes for the people who made Boston work. He would despise this, Ava said, a deep satisfaction filling her. That is precisely the point. David's tone grew more serious. We aren't just investing, Ava. We're proving there's a better way to do business. That you don't have to be a shark to succeed. Lily tugged on Ava's jacket. Mama, up. Ava lifted her daughter onto her hip. See this, sweetheart? Mama builds things that help people. Lily pointed a chubby finger at a rendering of a green space. Park, she declared. Yes, my baby. Lots of parks and gardens and safe places to play. All the things that make a neighborhood a home. Her father, Henry, arrived just after noon. He visited the office often, not to supervise, but because he loved watching his daughter come into her own. He brought lobster rolls from her favorite place and from his briefcase a small carved swan for Lily. A new friend for your little flock, he said. Lily's face lit up. Swanee, she chirped, and immediately began telling it a very important story. Her vocabulary is growing every day, Henry said with pride. She gets that from you. You were composing entire arguments at her age. Ava barely remembered that time, only hazy feelings of her mother's warmth and her father's steady, reassuring presence. Your mother kept a journal for you, he said softly. She wrote down every new word, every little accomplishment. Richard's tone grew gentle. Your mother would have been so proud of this. You, launching this gallery, raising this sweet girl, becoming the powerhouse she always knew you were. I see her in everything, Olivia admitted, her gaze on Grace. Especially now. I get it all now. What she meant was the artistic passion her mother shelved for her. The countless times she must have sidelined her own ambitions for Olivia's. The raw fear of raising a child, knowing the world isn't always safe. She paused, thinking of the boundless love and the dream of a life her mother never had for herself but wanted for her daughter. She wanted you to build your own. Richard's voice was hushed. To chart your own course, to follow your own artistic eye, unburdened by anyone who would doubt or diminish you. I was caged for so long. Liam took my freedom. I handed it to him. But you seized it back. Richard reached out, his hand covering hers on the table. That's what matters, Olivia. Not what was taken, but what you created from the ashes. And what you're building now. Grace scampered over, hoisting herself onto her grandfather's knee with a small doll. My dolly. That's a beautiful doll, my little star. Does she have a name? Grace pondered this with great seriousness, then declared, Gracie, Gracie the doll, that's perfect. Olivia cherished the sight of them. Her father, who forged a legacy from concrete and ambition, her daughter, who would be raised knowing a woman could forge one too. 2 generations of her family, linked by devotion, resilience, and the drive to keep building, keep imagining, keep advancing. She had forfeited so much in the past year. Her marriage, her illusions, her belief that love could be a shield. Yet what she had built was immeasurably greater than what she'd lost. She had her daughter, her gallery, her core identity, and the certainty she could withstand anything, confront any trial, and conquer any barrier. Because she was Olivia Hayes, Richard's daughter, and mother to a Grace who would carry their spirit forward. And her work had only just begun. It was the anniversary of the discovery. Olivia was awake before sunrise. Grace was sound asleep in her room. The condo was still a sanctuary. She lingered in bed for a second, absorbing the quiet, the comfort, and recalling a year ago. She had been organizing a nursery, mapping out a future that was about to be shattered. She had been Mrs. Liam Thornton, the architect's wife, a woman with everything but the one thing that mattered. Now she was Olivia Hayes, a single mother, a business owner, a warrior. The change was still staggering at times, the chasm between the woman she was and the woman she had become. She slipped out of bed, grabbing a simple cotton robe, not the expensive one she had discarded long ago, and went to the window. A steady Chicago rain was falling, the kind that settles in for the day. She didn't recoil, didn't feel the sting of panic or humiliation from that night. Instead, an unexpected feeling surfaced. Gratitude. The betrayal had stripped her of everything, and in doing so, had given her back to herself. She peeked into the nursery. Grace was awake, holding the rails of her crib, batting at a mobile of painted moons. "Mama!" Her entire face brightened. "Mama up!" Olivia scooped her daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair that was already changing. "Good morning, my love. Happy Freedom Day. Feedom Day." Grace mimicked the sounds, her version wonderfully off. Exactly. A year ago today, everything shifted. A year ago, Mama remembered who she was. They went to the kitchen. Olivia started the coffee. Grace stacked colorful blocks on the rug. The rain continued its steady rhythm. At 8, Sarah arrived with croissants. Chloe followed with a bright bouquet. Richard brought enough bagels to feed a small army. "Happy anniversary of your independence," Sarah said, embracing Olivia. "1 year since you started designing your new life? 1 year since you became the most sought-after art consultant in Chicago," Chloe chimed in. "The corporate bigwigs in this town are intimidated by you. You realize that, don't you?" "Good," Olivia grinned. "They ought to be." They gathered around the table, sipping coffee and eating, while Grace attempted to share her blocks with a stuffed giraffe. "I heard from Daniel this morning." Sarah checked her phone. The third artist's residency was funded today, ahead of schedule and under budget. "And the project?" Olivia inquired. "We've sponsored 47 young women this year. Studio fees covered, mentorships arranged, and relocation funds when necessary." Chloe's voice was filled with pride. "You've created something that will last for generations, Olivia." The project was Olivia's concept, a nonprofit to empower emerging female artists, to offer them the resources they couldn't find, to provide business coaching, to fund the fresh start so many artists desperately needed. She had named it the Grace Project for her mother, who was a painter, for her daughter, who would grow up knowing a woman's creativity has no limits, for herself, the Olivia who had always been there, waiting. "I couldn't have managed any of this without you all." Olivia looked at Sarah, who had deciphered every contract, at Chloe, who had championed her in galleries, and at her father, who had been her rock from day one. "You had faith in me when I had none in myself. You were my advocate when I was too broken to speak. You taught me what true loyalty means." That's the definition of family. Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "We are there for each other, always." Grace toddled over to Olivia, climbed onto her lap, and handed her a single block. Heart, Mama, yours. Tears welled in Olivia's eyes. That's right, sweetheart. My heart, and it is all yours. They passed the morning that way, sharing stories and laughter, not dwelling on the past year's agony, but celebrating the distance they had traveled. At noon, Olivia excused herself. There was a place she needed to visit. She drove to the small cemetery where her mother was laid to rest. The rain had ceased. The wet pavement mirrored the clearing sky. Birds began to sing. She stopped before the headstone. Catherine Hayes, beloved painter and mother. Hi, Mom. It's been some time. She recounted everything to her mother. About Liam, the deceit, the fight, the gallery, and the project. About little Grace, who was growing so quickly, so clever and fearless, and so much like the both of them. I wish you were here to see her, Olivia whispered. To hold her, to share your stories with her. She would have adored you so much. You would have adored her. A breeze stirred the trees, their rustling leaves sounding like a reply. I once believed what happened to me was the end of my world, being deceived, manipulated, and publicly shamed. Olivia inhaled deeply. But I finally understand. It was a gift. Because it forced me to wake up. It revealed my own strength. It allowed me to become the woman you always knew I could be. She rested a hand on the cool stone. Thank you, Mom, for the creative fire you gave me. I carry it with me, and I'm giving it to Grace, who will then pass it on. Because that is our legacy. We endure, we heal, we create, and we make the world more beautiful for the ones who follow. She remained there a long while, letting the quiet settle into her soul. Then she returned home. That evening, after her friends departed, after Richard had nodded off with Grace asleep on his chest, Olivia sat on her balcony and watched the day end. Her condo, her balcony, her skyline. A year prior, she had nothing that was truly her own, not even her identity. She had been an accessory to her husband, molded by his desires and erased by his betrayals. Now she was building an enterprise, a meaningful one, founded on integrity and the idea that art could change lives. But that wasn't the true triumph. The real victory was much quieter. She knew herself. Olivia Hayes, daughter, mother, entrepreneur, survivor. A woman who had been shattered and had reassembled the pieces into something stronger. She thought of Liam mired in his lawsuits, and of everyone who had ever dismissed her. They had been profoundly mistaken. Grace stirred on Richard's chest, blinked her eyes open, and saw her mother. Mama. She slid down, padded to the sliding door, and nudged it open. Olivia lifted her daughter onto her lap and gestured to the horizon. Look, baby, the sunset. Do you see the colors? Pretty, Grace murmured. Olivia pulled her daughter Grace closer, holding her tight. It's all right now. It is all so calm. Mama is right here, and I always will be. I love you, Mama. Those 4 simple words were her whole world. A soft rain began to fall again. A gentle Chicago mist. 1 year to the day her life had shattered. Olivia remained on the high-rise balcony, holding Grace as the city lights softened through the drizzle. The rain felt like a release, not a reminder of pain or rage. It was just the sky, rinsing the world anew. She was just a woman, a mother with her child, witnessing a future she had earned, a future that belonged completely to her. Richard came out to the balcony, finding his daughter and granddaughter there, observing the weather. Olivia, are you okay? She turned to her father, the man who had been her anchor, her biggest supporter, and the one who taught her that strength wasn't about never falling, but in the way you rise. I'm fine, Dad. Actually, I feel wonderful. She shifted Grace to one side, tapping the chair next to her. Come watch the rain with us. He sat down, putting an arm around her shoulders, and took his granddaughter's tiny hand. 3 generations connected by love, persistence, and a creative spirit. I used to hate the rain, Olivia confessed. After that night, the sound of a storm would send me right back. I'd feel that icy dread, the sickening moment of truth when I knew my life was a performance. But now, I see it differently. She watched a distant flicker of lightning. The storm didn't destroy me, it washed away the facade, the polite nods, the quiet manipulations, the empty life I was living. It took me down to the foundation, and from that cleared ground I built something honest. Richard remained silent, simply holding her a little tighter. Grace let out a big yawn, her head resting on her mother's arm. "She's tuckered out," Richard said quietly. "We should take her inside." "Just a minute longer," Olivia murmured, wanting to savor this flawless moment of peace. "What you've built here is astonishing, Nora." Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "To see you rise from that kind of betrayal, I'm just so incredibly proud." "Thanks, Dad," she whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. His approval was everything. The three of them watched the Texas storm roll in, a portrait of resilience. As Lily finally succumbed to sleep, Richard carried her inside. Nora lingered for a moment, watching the lightning tear across the sky. It felt powerful, cleansing, and entirely hers. This city, this life, this future. She'd forged it all herself. She closed the sliding door, settled her daughter into bed, and bid her father good night. At her own window, she watched the tempest sweep across the capital she now commanded. It had been 1 year since finding the mortgage application, 1 year since her rebirth. Tomorrow meant new blueprints to draft, new clients to secure, a new skyline to shape. But tonight was about stillness, a quiet gratitude for the toxic life she'd left and the empire she had since created. Nora Vance, a mother, a creator, a woman shattered by her own sister, now rebuilt stronger than any skyscraper. She smirked at her determined reflection in the glass. For the first time in a year, she slept without the ghosts of the past haunting her dreams. And that is how Nora Vance channeled the ultimate heartbreak into a $90 million architectural firm. If her story resonates, I'd be humbled to hear from you. Share in the comments what part of her struggle felt real to you. If you know someone who needs to see that you can build a palace from ruins, please share this with them. Don't forget to subscribe and activate notifications for more tales of women turning scars into strength. Until we meet again, just know that sometimes a storm doesn't come to tear down your house. Sometimes it arrives to clear the path for a new foundation.